the Subcommittee of Defense Appropriations, which was technically an aerospace subcommittee, where the Central Intelligence Agency's secret black box budgets are parked. In other words, LBJ is the paymaster for the CIA. And he's on that committee, he continues on that committee after he becomes majority leader. It's a rarity. And when he leaves to become vice president, he inserts Senator Harry F. Byrd of Virginia, whose first cousin, D.H. Byrd, happens to own the Texas School Depository Building. What an extraordinary coincidence. And of course, Senator Byrd is a loyal legislative lieutenant to Lyndon Johnson. So Johnson's control of the Central Intelligence Agency budget continues into his vice presidency through the legislative branch. We know that Lyndon Johnson was taking bribes from Carlos Marcello, passed through Jack Halfer, to protect the Bob's illegal gambling operations in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. And we know, of course, about his relationship with Big Texas Oil. John Kennedy has enraged the oil men because he's talked about and he's proposed repealing the oil depletion allowance, which means they will spend hundreds of millions of dollars more in taxes. So I make the case, motive means opportunity, eyewitness evidence, fingerprint evidence. All of this brings you to Lyndon Johnson as a linchpin in the plot to kill Kennedy. That doesn't mean the agency wasn't involved. They're involved up to their hips. So is the mob, so is Big Texas Oil. But I argue to you that it's Johnson who controls the local investigation. Remember, in 1963, murder is not a federal crime. Murder of a federal official is not yet a federal crime. Murder is a state crime, and therefore the jurisdiction belongs to the district attorney. The DA, within hours of Kennedy's assassination, has a press conference, announces that there was a plot, we're going to round up everybody. And then he gets a call from one of Johnson's aides. He holds a new press conference. He says, there was no plot, it was one guy, and we got him. Like overnight. Wow. And of course, Police Chief Jerry Curry never leaves Lyndon Johnson's sight from the minute Kennedy is shot. In fact, he actually rides back on Air Force One to Andrews Air Force Base, where the first guy bounding up the steps to give Johnson an enormous bear hug is the director of the Secret Service, Mr. Rowe. Small world. He got his first job from Lyndon Johnson in Roosevelt's Youth Administration. He's also a protege and former FBI man, a protege of J. Edgar Hoover. Now others are more eloquent on the Secret Service failures on November 22nd, 1963. But some of them are elementary. And it's interesting that the protocols that are involved in the travel of the president, which are observed in Miami and Chicago, are not observed in Dallas. The buildings on both sides of the street are supposed to be searched and sealed. They aren't. There's supposed to be 6 motorcycle policemen. There are 2. There's supposed to be agents on either side of the rear axle when the car drops below a certain mile per hour. They're not. There's supposed to be agents on the back bumper. There are not. There's supposed to be agents planted throughout the crowd, plain clothes. There are not. So it is impossible to believe that the murder of Kennedy could have happened without the complicity of the Secret Service. Virtually impossible to believe that. This is one of many of the anomalies that I examine in my book. My next book was on Watergate and Richard Nixon. Now, I had a close association with President Nixon. I got to know him extremely well in his post-presidential years. I worked for him in a number of capacities, both before and after his resignation. My book on Nixon would not have been possible without the assistance of Len Kolodny, who's here with us today, and whose book, Silent Coup, has to be read prior to reading my book on Nixon because they're bookends. We help fill in a lot of the gaps. And I know he had a presentation here, and I've heard him speak before. He has exposed the entire myth of the Woodward, Bernstein, Washington Post.
Fairy tale.
I was going to say something worse, but fairy tale regarding Watergate. You see, Nixon, and I'm not to say that Nixon was in any way a saint. I don't say that. He was both very great and very flawed. But here's what they didn't expect him to be: a peacemaker. Because he ended the war in Vietnam on a much faster timetable than the Joint Chiefs want. He reached a sole agreement with the Russians, which the Joint Chiefs were opposed to. He opened the door to China, and he exacerbated that by negotiating the whole thing around the diplomatic and intelligence corps, so they learned about it only after the deal was cut. That made them even angrier. Yes, peacemaker. They expected him to be the ultimate hawk. They expected carte blanche in Vietnam, which, when you look at the number of bombs Johnson dropped, you gotta wonder what they wanted. So, yes, Nixon, he sowed the seeds of his own destruction through his own paranoia. But as I say, he ended the war in Vietnam. He opened the door to China. He reached an strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets. He single-handedly saved Israel from annihilation in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, over the objections of Kissinger, over the objections of the Joint Chiefs. When the Israelis have their backs against the sea after a surprise attack by Egypt and Syria, it's Richard Nixon, the same Richard Nixon who said disparaging things about Jews in the Watergate tapes. It's Richard Nixon who saves Israel. You don't believe me? Ask Golda Meir. She said it. He desegregated the public schools without violence. When he became president, roughly 20% of the public schools were desegregated. That number was near 90 at the time he left. He gave us federal revenue sharing so that federal money could best be spent at the local level by local decision makers. He desegregated the trade unions. He gave us our first elementary environmental protection through the EPA. Now, I understand that agency's gone crazy today, but in 1970, we had no environmental protection. I'm sorry, there are people who are so greedy, so anxious to make a profit, they will ruin our water and our air to do so. Now, you can go too far. We've done that today where you can't build anything, but the Environmental Protection Agency, as it was originally conceived, was an accomplishment. Now compare that to accomplishments of our current president. Those would be, okay, we'll move on. In any event, this brings me to the Clintons' war on women. This is the book that should have been utilized by the Trump campaign earlier than it has been. I want to be very clear because there's an enormous amount of media misdirection. I am completely uninterested in marital infidelity, or indiscretions, or girlfriends, or mistresses, or one-night stands by Bill Clinton. If I wrote such a book, it would have to be an encyclopedia. The man's an addict. But rape and sexual assault and exposing yourself in an aroused state and biting women, which is his MO because he bit Juanita Broderick through the upper lip, bit her so badly that she had to go to the hospital. Her upper lip was turning black. He bit two other women, one identified by Mike Isikoff of NBC, now I think then with Newsweek, now, and also one identified by Roger Morris, then of the Washington Post. So those are hardly all conservative outlets. No, he's a sexual predator. Now the liberals say, well, but he's not running for president. No, but Hillary Clinton is an accessory after the fact in every one of those sex crimes, because she knows about them and she runs the cover-up. She's the one who hires the heavy-handed private detectives and the nasty lawyers to dig dirt on these women, to discredit them, to bully them, to threaten them, either into silence or into not answering a subpoena. And James Carville says these women are trailer trash. Let me get this straight, James. It's okay to rape a poor woman? Is that what you're saying? That's the worst elitist crap I've ever heard in my life. And he's viewed as some great genius for saying that. It's insulting. It's typical of the elitism that surrounds the Clintons. Bill Clinton's first rape is at Oxford. He's expelled from Oxford. The idea that he left Oxford to go to Yale Law School is a joke. No one drops out of the Rhodes Scholar program. Those who didn't complete the program, about 1%, that's because they died. No, Eileen Wellstone is the name of the 19-year-old that he raped. And then Senator William Fulbright of Arkansas pulled strings to cover that rape up. Now, my book is about far more than the sexual exploits of Bill Clinton and the cover-up operation by his wife. But you cannot run for president as an advocate for women if you are, in fact, an abuser of women. Hillary says that she's an advocate for children. What about Kathy Shelton? Kathy Shelton was 12 years old when she was so brutally raped by two men that she was in a coma for 5 days. She was so viciously raped that she can never bear children. One of the men escapes and is never identified. The other man, 41 years old, well, he gets a very fine lawyer appointed by the judge, who happens to be a crony of the Clintons. He appoints Hillary Rodham Clinton as this rapist's attorney. And Mrs. Clinton bullies a 12-year-old on the stand and says to her, "You fantasized about sex with older men, haven't you? You wanted somebody older, didn't you? You've made false allegations of being assaulted sexually by older men in the past. Every one of those things is a lie without any foundation whatsoever." And then she gets the judge to agree, since the hospital records and the police records in this case are conveniently missing, gone, lost by the county. They said it was a flood. They lost them in a flood. She gets the judge to agree that the forensic examination of the 12-year-old woman's underwear should be limited to a small piece of cloth that's cut out of the underwear instead of the entire garment. Suppression of evidence. Now, you could argue that under our American system, every person charged with a crime is entitled to an attorney, and that's right. But here's the problem. We have on tape Hillary Clinton after the trial laughing about his guilt, saying she knew he was guilty and she was happy that she got him off with time served, 2 months. They ruined the life of a little girl, and she got him off with 2 months, time served. Does that sound like an advocate for children to you? Now, every woman in this country needs to know about that case in the next 23 days. I was delighted to see Kathy Shelton surface at the debate. I know she's going to be speaking out. The Clintonites can't say, "Oh, that's about Bill." No, that's not about Bill. That's about Hillary. Hillary, the advocate for children. Hillary, the one who gave the go order at Waco that killed 18 children under the age of 8. Yes, co-president Hillary gave the order to her hand-selected Deputy Attorney General Webster Hubbell, Chelsea's father, that Webster Hubbell. And Janet Reno, the other hand-picked stooge of Hillary Clinton. It was Hillary who wanted Waco over because she didn't want it to distract from her upcoming health care extravaganza. Now lastly, we heard some discussion, and she keeps calling Donald Trump a racist. This is really getting old. Yet, Bill Clinton is the one who has an abandoned black son, Danny Williams, run off by Hillary. Now, the Washington Post and the LA Times and the Associated Press reported that a DNA test that was conducted in 1999 disproved that. And now you have mummy dummies like Megyn Kelly and others repeating that. So I dug into it. And here's what I learned. The Star tabloid obtained no DNA sample from Bill Clinton. What they did was to get the written report on his DNA that was included in Ken Starr's impeachment report. The problem with that is that in order to legally determine paternity, there are two different tests that must be conducted and then compared. One of those tests is insufficient. It's not enough data. Yet when you go to the Starr impeachment report, what you really have is half a report on Bill's DNA. You only have one of the two tests. Missing are the results of the second test. Slate magazine, hardly a publication of the right. Snopes.com, hardly a publication of the right. Dr. Henry Lee, one of the leading pathologists in the country, have all written that any test utilizing only that sample would have to be inconclusive. It could prove nothing. Yet the Star announces that the test that they conducted shows that Danny Williams is not the son of Bill Clinton. It didn't show that at all. It didn't show that he was, and it didn't show that he wasn't. It was inconclusive, but that didn't stop the Post and the LA Times, the others, from misreporting it. Now here's the kicker. Who owned the Star? A man named Robert Altman, Bill's college roommate at Georgetown, Undersecretary of the Treasury in the Clinton administration, a man who had to step down from that position because he got caught giving the Clintons a heads up in Whitewater. This was a classic setup. The Star never ran the story, but they did put out a press release, and they did conduct interviews by their editor who said, "We didn't publish the story because the test showed that Bill was not Danny's father." It showed nothing of the kind, and I think his name was Phil Butler, was the editor, admitted that he'd never actually seen a written test result. Well, that's because there probably never was one, or if there was, whoever conducted it knew in advance that it had to be inconclusive. Now, if you go online and you see video of Danny Williams, he looks just like his father. What are the arguments for him? Very simply, his mother was a cocaine-addicted prostitute. She was with Bill Clinton on 13 occasions for paid sex. She described the exact floor plan of the cabin that was owned by Bill's mother, where they would go for sexual trysts, and she passed a polygraph, not once, but twice, 10 years apart. She and her sister, Lucille Bolton, and her sister, Shirley, all say that at the beginning of every month, a man driving a state vehicle with Arkansas state tags would put an envelope in the mailbox with seven crisp $100 bills. And they also say that an Arkansas state trooper would deliver Christmas presents to the home where Danny and his mother lived every Christmas. Now, Larry Patterson confirms that in his book. He was an Arkansas trooper and one of those who delivered the presents. L.D. Brown, another Arkansas trooper, confirms it in his book. He also delivered some of these Christmas presents. In 1999, Lucille Bolton, who's Danny's aunt, who is a deacon in her church for 30 years, who has worked in the same public school cafeteria for 30 years, who is an upright member of her community, she took the infant, Danny, to the governor's mansion, and she waited outside the gate, and when the gates opened to let a car out, she ran inside the compound. She got as far as the front door, she knocked on the door, she demanded to see Hillary Clinton. They said, about what? They said, this here is Bill Clinton's son, and it's time you take care of him. They slammed the door in her face, and as she put it to me in an interview, they run us off like dogs. So he's not just Bill's abandoned son. He's Bill's abandoned son banished by Hillary. In other words, Black Lives Matter unless you're Bill Clinton's son. It takes a village? Are you going to lecture us about a village? You don't even take care of your own. That's racism. There's the racism. Now, Danny Williams has a couple alternatives. Now that the DNA test that was fraudulently taken in 1999 has been debunked, he can ask his famous father to do the right thing, because a boy needs his father. He's got 5 kids of his own, and he struggles to put food on the table. He works a construction job by day, works at a 7-Eleven at night to feed the hungry mouths of his family. His parents, his stepmother, and his father are worth upwards of $300 million. He can do 3 things. He has asked Bill for a voluntary DNA sample to resolve this. If Hillary really thinks that Black Lives Matter, she shouldn't stand in the way. Secondarily, he could go to Monica Lewinsky and get a verified and complete DNA sample to compare with his own DNA. Whether or not she would cooperate, that remains to be seen. If she still owns the dress. She was in custody of the dress. She had turned down a multi-million-dollar offer to buy it several years ago, but that's a second possibility. And then there's the third possibility. In a paternity suit, most of the time, a judge will order a simple DNA test to settle the matter of paternity. Now in Watergate, the lesson of Watergate, unless I get this wrong, was no one is above the law. Wasn't that what they told us? Well, according to the FBI director, Hillary's above the law because she egregiously and repeatedly broke the law and lied about it and has paid no penalty. You see, the the FBI is too busy investigating Roger Stone. Whether a judge would order a simple black man who's 30 years old from Arkansas, whether he would order a DNA test, that remains to be seen. But I do know that the friends of Danny Williams are going to be founding a GoFundMe to raise the money for first-rate legal representation in a paternity suit. Now this question may not get answered in the next 23 days, but it will get answered. Because you see, to me, Black lives do matter. All lives matter. Thank you very much.
Hello. I just want to announce that once Roger started talking about the Clintons, our internet connection got cut off. Okay, not just once, but twice. Okay, now we haven't had any other problems during the whole convention. So use a troublemaker, Roger. Okay, so do we have any questions for Roger? You willing to take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. 1, 2. This mic isn't working, Jason.
This is interestingly enough, the other night I was supposed to do a radio show, a late night radio show called After Midnight. I went on Skype to prepare to do it. They were hacked, their whole system went down. My own email was hacked about a month ago. It has been horrific. They got into my bank accounts, they got into my wife's email, into my website email, into my Facebook feed, into my Twitter feed. So I don't think these things are coincidental. Later this week, we're going to lift the veil on Media Matters for America. This is a criminal enterprise where they wash money and they commingle nonprofit money with political money in violation of the law. And they have mounted a multi-million-dollar effort online and elsewhere to harass and discredit me. If you go online every day, there are hundreds of trolls attacking me for this, that, and the other thing. The best thing to do is ignore it, but we will expose all of that later in the week. All right, some questions.
Yeah,
Yes.
I saw a report, I want to see if you think it's credible, about that there's also a white female claiming that she's the daughter of Bill. Do you know anything about that?
I do know a little bit. First of all, I think she's Roger Clinton's daughter, if she's anybody's daughter. But secondly, there's some evidence that that was put out there to try to discredit Danny Williams. Because if you go on YouTube right now, you will see what happens when somebody shouted a question at Bill 2 weeks ago, what about your son Daniel? Look at the look on his face. It speaks volumes. He can't hide it. This is his son, and he knows it. He obviously was prepared to surreptitiously send him money, so in an odd way, he tried to do the right thing, but it stood in the way of his political career. So I don't think that the young lady is Bill's son. By the way, Bill's daughter. She doesn't look like Bill in any way, but there is some possibility that she is Roger's daughter.
Well, just an idea, I mean, that's something that could be done in 23 days is to see if those two people are related. The son, the claims, and the there.
Well,
And even if she's Roger's daughter, they could determine if there's a relationship between the two. It's similar to
Conceivably, kind of the way that they had to back into Thomas Jefferson's fatherhood of a child with Sally Hemings. There's another way as well. It's a little convoluted, but Bill's real father is not Billy Blythe. Bill's real father is Dr. George Wright. Billy Blythe cannot be Bill's father because if you count 9 months backward, he's in Europe serving his country in the war at the time that Bill is supposedly conceived. Dr. Wright's children look amazingly like Bill Clinton. So he has two half-brothers or brothers, and therefore a match between either one of the Wright brothers, one of them is a Republican judge, oddly enough, a match between their DNA and Danny's DNA would be another way of proving the parenthood. This mystery is going to get solved, maybe not before the election, but it will get solved. Next question.
Yes. One thing I wanted to mention, there's a 50-year anniversary coming up this summer on June 8th, and that is the anniversary of the attack on the Liberty by Israel.
Yes.
And that's the reason why the Joint Chiefs did not want to protect Israel. But my actual thing is, when you see Donald Trump filmed when he's in his office, behind his left shoulder usually, there is a picture of JFK. And he's made odd comments off and on throughout this, the primaries and after and during the election campaign, where he said something about JFK, and other ones where he said something about 9/11. What are we going to find out?
Well, I think he's been very forthright about the fact that the two presidents he admires are John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, the only two outsiders you've had as president in my lifetime. In the case of Kennedy, they killed him. In the case of Reagan, they co-opted him. But he also understands that relitigating 9/11 in the middle of a presidential campaign is not the place to do it. He's expressed his concerns, and if he's achieved no other public service, if there's anything that he should go down in the history books for, he prevented Jeb Bush from being president. And that makes him a hero. Look, the only thing predictable about Donald Trump is that he's entirely unpredictable. and hopefully we'll see some more of that. My friend Phil Nelson has written a terrific book about the attack on the USS Liberty. I covered extensively in the paperback edition of my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy. Johnson was a lunatic. He was a psychopath. He was a pill-popping drunk. He was a sadist. He was mentally unbalanced. And he gave the order. The Joint Chiefs were only doing what they were instructed to do. Now, when you come out and say that, they call you an anti-Semite. I think the facts tell the story. They have gone to great lengths to try to cover up the facts of surrounding the attack on the USS Liberty. There are a couple good books on this, but the one I've read most recently was my friend Phil Nelson's book.
There's a script for a movie. Somebody just needs to do it.
Find somebody in Hollywood who would finance that. Okay, next, yes.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Quick comment, I'm sorry. As a college student, I voted for Richard Nixon in the late 60s, early 70s, and I appreciated your comments. I was trained in public health, and you did not mention the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, during Nixon's administration.
Yeah, you can go on and on and on. His domestic accomplishments are extraordinary. So, for example, he's the first president who decides that we have really given Native Americans a raw deal, and he puts in place a program for which they can begin getting back their land or some compensation for their land. And he vastly increases funding to deal with the drug abuse problems and the alcohol problems that exist on Native American reservations. He quadruples the amount of money that we spend in our inner cities to try to foster what he calls black capitalism. He triples the amount for minority scholarship. Across the board, his domestic accomplishments are extraordinary, particularly when you compare them to what we have today. Yes?
You've given so much fodder to respond, and obviously I'm here because of the Kennedy assassination and what we all believe is kind of an erroneous attribution to Lee Harvey Oswald. At the same time, and we do know LBJ may have been behind the assassination, but when you look around at the history of what JFK represented, and I think Democrats who had an ideal in the 60s about what this country could be, I think you're misrepresenting a lot of what the Clintons have been about, a lot of what Democrats through these last couple of decades have been about. And I think Reagan said it once, that if you give me credit for some of the things that I did along with the criticism, then I think it should be in balance. I think you're misrepresenting a lot of what the Clintons stand for, I think, or what they've done.
Such as?
Well, I think if you look back, both the work that they've done with the foundation, compare it to the Trump organization.
Let's stop right there. The Clinton, I don't think you total $1 million total.
Because he's not giving any money to the foundation.
10% of the Clinton take is going for actual charitable activities, actually less. This is a long debate, but...
Well, I think if you look at the intentions of Democrats, Republicans, I think there is love of country by most of the candidates. I think you're obviously presenting a one-sided image of that period, and I think JFK's legacy was that there was a vision.
No, let him speak. Come on, let him speak.
I think there was a legacy of, and one of the reasons I'm here is because I feel like, yes, the country went down a problematic path, and you obviously have reasons to hate LBJ. Nixon did, maybe not the individual murders that perhaps LBJ did, but he was responsible for a lot of pain and suffering and a lot of individuals. And I think if you look at Donald Trump or any of the candidates that you're bashing, they all share some of the same problematic ways of looking at the world. I just believe in better humanity and the ideals of what John F. Kennedy stood for. And I think we're here today, it's partly in memory of that which he stood for. And I think you are unfortunately sounding like you're basically bashing the legacy of that president.
A, read my books. B, John Kennedy wanted substantial monetary reform. He scared the crap out of the bankers. He did not want war over Cuba. He did not want war over the Cuban Missile Crisis. He did not want war he did not want to go further into Vietnam, although Robert Kennedy disavows that, debunks it in an oral history after his death. No, he was a different Democrat. He was a different kind of Democrat. Right now, we're hurtling towards war. Pick up the newspapers.
There's no way that Hillary Clinton or any of the Democrats in power now or in the future want war.
You're
That
going
is
to
a mis-
You're not reading the newspapers. You clearly can't be.
You're not close. You're not even close.
There may be intercession because of humanitarian reasons, which you could argue whether we should be doing that or not. But the fundamentals of government policy is to avoid war. I don't think any
We
president-
moved to DEFCON 1 today in Syria. Can you not read the newspapers? Did you not see the speech by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs last week, rattling the sabers? You'll be at war by election day.
How many
Watch.
times did Nixon or Reagan raise to DEFCON 1, 2, or however many levels it goes to, for reasons that were political or otherwise?
We'll put you down as undecided. Next question.
Sit down, please, sir. Sit down.
Yes, indeed, and, you know, I knew, Roger is controversial, no ifs, ands, buts about that, okay? And it's not, I really don't want to get heavy political here, so, but we've only got about 2 minutes left of this session, so this is the last question here.
I'm going to pass it to Han, but first I want to say thank you. And could you give this same talk in front of a huge crowd of about 20 Americans, because you've helped my American anxiety with everything you said today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's kind.
Roger, thank you also. That was my wife right there.
Smart lady.
She's very smart. And this may be off the topic, but it's kind of on the topic, and that's the Deepwater Horizon. I believe that was a planned event. And if you look at the after results, BP got basically the monopoly on the Gulf. They ran all the other majors out. They actually wanted to go down to Brazil with George Soros leading with a $2 billion loan from Obama. And then they basically have been controlling the Gulf ever since. It just was like and there was no forensic engineering studies done, even though they were there. We met one of them who wanted to do it. The president wouldn't send any help. He wanted to make sure it looked really bad so that they would then control the Gulf. They were his biggest contributors, BP. Am I making sense?
Yes, totally.
Thank you.
Totally. All right, I want to thank you all very much.
Let's give a big round of applause for Mr. Sullivan. We're going to take basically a 15-minute break. Then we have Gary's going to do a brilliant presentation. Roger will be out here in the lobby. We will have his books for sale and for sign.
The foundation is a multi-billion-dollar operation. The Trump Foundation